Hello again from my front porch. Today, if you ever needed a reason to assume that I'm completely and utterly crazy, I'm probably going to give it to you today. This will be the time. This will be the episode that proves it. So, a while back, I had a little exchange with a really good friend of mine on Facebook, and we were talking about the Great Pyramids. And I said that I felt that they were much older than what we are traditionally told that they are, and that they weren't even built by the pharaohs of Egypt that were told, are the pharaohs who get the credit for doing so. And I said that I believe that they had been built by a much older civilization, that they were already there when those pharaohs were in place. And that there was a little discussion generated about that, and where I felt that came from. And it's been interesting that since that public exchange that she and I had, which was a very friendly exchange, it wasn't a debate of any kind. She just because what she had said was, okay, so why was I saying they were all other than the belief that aliens built them or something, that's not where I went with it. I believe that there was a civilization on our planet much older than recorded history documents. I believe that there are structures all over our planet that are impossible to explain, that we keep finding. Archaeology keeps uncovering these things that are difficult to give explanation for, because we're constantly being told that humanity wasn't advanced enough to be able to do the kind of construction that this would seem to indicate was done at this point in time or earlier. And so I personally believe that there was a civilization, whether it was global or more regional. I don't know. I'm not that specific about the theory, but I do believe that there was a prior civilization that, for whatever reason, ceased to exist, likely because of a cataclysm. And there is some evidence over especially in India of possibly an actual nuclear Holocaust event taking place. Now, I know that sounds absolutely insane. No. We've just developed those recently. Well, we always say history repeats itself. What if we're not as unique and creative as we think we are? What if we're just following a very similar path that we've already followed in the past? And I know there's some pushback that people say, well, wait a minute, I thought you were a Christian. Don't you believe in the young earth and the creation story? I do believe in the creation story, and I do believe God created the heavens and the earth. I don't necessarily espouse the whole young earth option, and it's not that I'm trying to compromise. That's not an issue for me. Honestly, whether God created the world in a literal 6 days, or whether each day, where the Bible tells us, a day to the Lord is like 1,000 years. And that's not meant to be an exact measurement. What it's meant to say, what we count as a day means nothing to God. God has no such time, whatever. And so when we read in Genesis that God created this in a day, is it our day? Or is it God's day? Because by God's definition, there is no timeline definition. And so I'm not as hung up on it has to be 6 literal days. Do I believe God could have done it 6 literal days? Yeah, I personally do. Do I believe it has to be that way? No. I mean, even if God took, I don't know, 1,000,000 years to do one thing as opposed to one day, still the idea that this being that we call God, that this being had the power to even do it at all, is to me the miracle. So it doesn't compromise my belief in God to say, well, maybe it's not 6 literal days, and maybe the earth isn't as young as we want to say based on trying to do chronology through the Old Testament. And I'm not faulting people who gravitate that. That's fine. I'm not trying to stir up controversy. I'm just saying for myself, I don't have a problem believing that, okay, well, maybe maybe the timeline of our planet is a lot longer than what we're thinking about. And that the focus of Scripture, the focus of the Bible, that's God-inspired information for us to benefit from. Well, if God doesn't feel like we need to be fully versed on a prior civilization that royally screwed up, well, then he wouldn't have included that in what was happening and in what it would be spelling out. Now, I don't know, maybe would it have benefited to spell those things out? Maybe. On the other hand, maybe it would have inspired mankind to go off the rails even sooner than we are already seeming to do anyway. Whole nother theological topic to debate about that. That's not where I'm wanting to go with this. I want to talk about the Great Pyramids and the theory that I have about the Great Pyramids, because that's the part where you're going to think that if you maybe already think I'm crazy based on what I just said, but when I tell you what I think about the Great Pyramids, you're going to say, oh man, oh. but here's genuinely what I believe. I believe, as I said, that there was some much older civilization, and the topography of our planet and the climate of our planet has not always been what it is today. For example, we know the Sahara Desert at one point in time was more like the Sahara Ocean or the Sahara Sea. I mean, that's a big difference. And all around the world we find evidence in fossil form of plant life and animal life that had no business existing where it's found, based on the climate and the nature of that part of the world now. But however far back you go, that could have been a radically different, and likely was a radically different environment. And so I'm not even restricting my brain to, in the desert, blah, blah, because it may not even have been desert at the time. So anyway, so with that is I'm being blunt and upfront about that, because that forms a foundation. You have to accept that idea to buy into anything else that I'm going to sell now. So if you don't buy into that, you're not going to buy into any of the rest of it, and that's okay. I'm not sharing this to try to convince anybody. I'm sharing this because, as I was saying initially, I had that very public conversation with a friend of mine, and since then there have been 2 or 3 other people who I've interacted with in direct messaging, in private messages about this topic. And what's interesting is each one of them has expressed that they actually have had similar thoughts to what I've had, but they're just not quite as willing to talk about them publicly, because they're afraid other people will judge them for having this weird idea. You know what? Okay, I'm going to put this out there, and I'm going to say, here's my weird idea, and if you think it's weird, okay, whatever. There was a time where a lot of things we take for granted now as established science were somebody's weird thought at the time. I'm just saying. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying that ultimately I'll be proven right. I may be proven completely wrong with what I believe, with what my theory on this is. But it would not be the first time in history that someone has espoused something that was way different than what the established, agreed upon train of thought was, only to down the road find out that crazy, weird idea really was the truth. And so, you never know. So here we go. Again, I believe there's this much older civilization that built structures, and I believe that the core of the Great Pyramids were built by them. Now, I say core because I also don't believe the Great Pyramids were built at one time. I don't believe they were the result of just one construction. Now, I will qualify this by saying specifically I'm talking about the Great Pyramid, but we know there are 2 large ones and 1 smaller one. The smaller one may be a copycat. It may be something that was created by someone else. It could be just the other 2 that were created by the ancient civilization. I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist. I haven't had the chance to go to Egypt and study things firsthand. I'm not an Egyptologist. I'm just an amateur who reads up on stuff and finds this stuff really interesting and notices little details here and there. And so let's talk about the Great Pyramid specifically. Now, we're constantly told it was built as a tomb for Pharaoh, but it's also commonly reported that there's never been any remains found in the tomb. And there's one box-like thing that's broken and damaged. That was probably the tomb there, and it was taken care of by grave robbers. But it would have been a very, very small person that would have been in that box, not a full person, unless you bent them in half to fit them in there. And that'd be just kind of weird. Additionally, there are absolutely no markings inside the Great Pyramid except for one. There was one, and it was crude, but it was one reference to Khufu, one of the Great Pyramid, one of the pharaohs of Egypt, and that was found by one of the early explorers of the Great Pyramid, Harold Weiss. Harold, I think that's his name, but Weiss, last name, there's been a back and forth. Was it authentic? Was it fraudulent? Did Weiss plant it himself? So that it would stand out, and he could claim that, and I don't think it was planted. I think it was authentic. I think it was authentic, and I think it was also authentic from the time of Khufu. However, I don't think that means Khufu built the Great Pyramid. I think that means that Khufu's people got into the Great Pyramid and snooped around. Maybe they're the ones that damaged the box and took out whatever was in it. But see, if you're a pharaoh and you're going to invest the amount of time and effort to build a grand structure like that, which was the biggest structure on the entire planet for a very long time, if you're going to do that, wouldn't you put your name on it officially somewhere? Not just in what basically is graffiti on a block in one location. Wouldn't you have it ornate with just your whole story and how great and awesome you are all over the insides of everything? But there's nothing, not a thing, nothing like that in there. It's smooth and clean, and that's just weird. Now, it could be that there are other rooms in there that we still haven't found, and maybe there's some of that kind of stuff in there. I don't know. What I do know is what we've seen so far, it just doesn't add up to being a tomb. Everything that we have found that actually is a tomb is loaded with hieroglyphs. These people just could not talk about themselves enough. And so the idea that the Great Pyramid is built and it's for Khufu and he doesn't put his name on it anywhere, that's bizarre. But even more so, I think that there's this initial pyramid, smaller than the Great Pyramid. There's initial pyramid, and maybe it was found by Khufu's people. Maybe that was actually found by other people beforehand. But they go, and so just like we went to the moon and put our flag, on the moon, Khufu's people leave an inscription that on behalf of Khufu, they were there. Khufu was here. I mean, that would be more in keeping with the type of Khufu graffiti that Weiss found. Now, here's the other thing that causes me to think that not only is it older, but it was built in stages. See, I think there's an initial pyramid, and then there was another layer added, and another layer added, maybe by subsequent cultures too, not even by the original culture. There is on the Great Pyramid what they call the entrance to the Great Pyramid. You've seen it. It's like two sets of stone, and they're like this, and it creates an archway. And but they had to peel away the outer exterior stones, or some of them had to just fall away, for them to find that entrance. Now, that's an odd entrance. Now you say, well, that was done because they wanted to secure the thing. They wanted it to be, the resting place of the pharaoh. And I find that skeptical. To create this grand entrance into there, and this kind of grand entrance into it, and then put a whole nother layer up around on the outside of the pyramid that completely covers up, doesn't let on that it's there whatsoever. That seems a little weird. And again, no inscriptions anywhere on there either. There is an inscription now, however, on one of those beams. I think the left beam, when you're looking at the top piece there, in the 1800s, the mid 1800s, there was a group of explorers from Austria, I believe, and they, using hieroglyphs, they actually inscribed some great things about the King of Prussia. And you know, birthday notice or celebratory stumps. If you went there now and looked, you would see these hieroglyphs added to one of those beams up there. One of those. I'm sure they have a formal name, but one of those doorway. It's not the threshold, that's at the bottom, but the thing at the top. that there's that inscription on there. Now, does that mean that the King of Prussia built the Great Pyramid because there's an inscription on there with hieroglyphs? No, of course not. It's been added by somebody else who came along and just decided to slap the name of their leader on the Great Pyramid. I think that's the same thing that accounts for Khufu's name in the Great Pyramid, that his people went in and, you know, put his inscription on something in there to lay claim to it in that way. I also think that outer layer covering the doorway is one of the indications that the doorway part and the outer layer were not done at the same time. And if they weren't done at the same time, how do we know that the doorway layer, the thing we're seeing here, how do we know that was done at the time of the pyramid being built? How do we know that wasn't added later? And there's so much about the interior of the Great Pyramid that we don't know about how it was built. But as you go higher up on the Great Pyramid, because now we do know that there was an alabaster, just a shiny marble exterior that used to be on it, smooth and white, and made it glisten in the sun from miles and miles away. And for whatever reason, that has been stripped away, either because it's fallen off or because it was stripped off to use in building elsewhere in Cairo. But because of that, now you have the exposed sublayer that was underneath that. And as you go higher up on the Great Pyramid, there actually are gaps that you can enter, that you can go into. And these gaps have the weirdest situations inside, where you know, you'd expect to see blocks, and then, okay, if something chipped away, what you're looking at the next layer is just a sub layer of the same kind of blocking. But it's not. It's like weird angle stuff. And again, what that says to me is these were not built by the same people. That the outer layer we're looking at, that we see now, is different from the layer right underneath it, the layer that would also include the doorway. That those are different layers. And so if that's the case, I still contend even farther underneath that could very well be an even older layer. And there is indication that from ancient writings that there's discussion about both the pyramids and the Sphinx being there longer than the Egyptian dynasties even recall. We keep trying to guess who built the Sphinx. Who was the Sphinx supposed to look like? Well, what if the Sphinx wasn't even built by the Egyptians? I mean, the Egyptians that we think of. What if it was built by somebody even older? And there is all kinds of geological evidence around the Sphinx in its enclosure that shows that there once was a lot of water. Like, there's a lot of water erosion around there. And also consider the fact that when we see the Sphinx today, and you see the perfectly shaped body and the big paws sticking out in front of it and all that, that most of that isn't even original. Both the Romans did some renovation of it, and there's been more recent renovations in the last 150 years. That a lot of that you see around the outside, the bottom part of it, especially around the outside, that smooth sculpting from the back side of the Sphinx all the way around, those big paws out front, that's all been rebuilt. That was not originally there. The Sphinx, when it was buried under the sand, those elements were not there. They've been added since the thing has been dug out. And supposedly they were added so that they were accurate. Well, but accurate to what? Accurate to what archaeology guessed that they were at that point in time. If we were making that guess now, would it still look that way? We don't know. Anyway, this is going on a lot longer than I really intended it to, but I find it really intriguing and interesting. So he continues. But again, I'm not trying to talk anyone else into, jumping on whatever crazy bandwagon that, that I might be espousing. But I also I really genuinely don't think that the pharaohs of Egypt were responsible for building the pyramids. I think they were responsible for adding additional layers that expanded the size of the Great Pyramid. And that, I think, is also much more feasible. We always talk about, how did they build the Great Pyramids? Because we assume they started from scratch. Well, what if they weren't starting from scratch? What if they were just figuring out a way to add other layers to what was already there? What if in their minds they were either doing their own renovations, like it happened to the Sphinx, where we literally added entire aspects to the Sphinx that wasn't original? What if that's what was being done? Or what if the pharaohs or whoever the rulers were that did it, what if they were trying to associate themselves with this great monument that was well known and well respected by adding their own construction, making it even bigger because they were bigger? I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not, and neither do you. In fact, nobody knows. Everything that we know about ancient history is really circumstantial evidence, a lot of guesswork. We find some pottery here and some tool implements there and some other some bones with some decoration with them, adornment, and from those kind of scattered details we make all kinds of assumptions. Educated guess, but it's still a guess. And many times we are now seeing the educated guesses of yesterday are proven to be wrong or even totally invalid today because some new bit of information comes up that causes us to go, how do we make that fit? It doesn't. I believe the Great Pyramid itself, and maybe the other pyramids too, but the Great Pyramid for sure, I believe it's in that category. I do not believe that it was built by Khufu. I don't even believe that the whole pyramid was built by the ancient Egyptians. I think at most they added a layer to it to lay claim to it for themselves. That's my craziness. That's my episode today. And you just spent, a good 20 minutes listening to me ramble on about it. So I'm not sure which of us now is crazier. But there you go. That's my random crazy theory about the pyramid. And so there you go. You got it. And so if you're someone who feels equally, feel free to drop me a note and say, yeah, I agree with you, Paul. I think there's merit to that. If you think that I'm completely out to lunch, well, you can tell me that too. But you're going to get in line because there's others already doing that too. But anyway, that's it for this episode. I'll let you go. I'll see y'all next time from my front porch.